Welcome to The Craft. I'm your host, Meg Lopez. This podcast is a collection of intimate conversations on artistry, mastery, and life with talented, passionately curious creatives and entrepreneurs. Most are dear friends, some are those I've admired from afar. I hope you enjoy these conversations, this exploration of the humanity that connects all of us, as much as I do having them. Thank you for being here and for listening. Co-founder of Street Dreams magazine, Eric Veloso always had the hustle and photographer's eye in him. From learning how to frame shots while working in film, to learning the ropes of distribution at Aritzia, Eric followed his natural instincts, growing Street Dreams with his business partners from a print publication to also a creative studio. Born in Calgary and raised in Vancouver, he was taught the virtue of hard work by watching a single mother go from a hotel maid to director of entertainment services. His passion for photography came in his teens, after a skateboard injury sidelined him. To pass time at the skate park while recovering, he picked up a camera, shooting everything urban. While in New York in 2014, a fated run-in with a photographer that he followed on Instagram named Steve Irby led him, Steve, and Mike Cobarrubia to found Street Dreams magazine, which quickly grew in the following years to include a creative studio, clothing line available in Tokyo, and loyal global community. In this conversation, we dive deep into the origins of his hustle and growing up in a Latino household, Chilean to be exact, the combination of hard work and right timing when it came to the birth of Street Dreams, the magazine's guest-edited issue with Jeff Staple and the issue launch party that shut down a New York City block, what it's been like creating campaigns and activations for the likes of Nike, New Balance, Tribeca Film Festival, Coach, HBO, and more. A hilarious interaction with comedian George Lopez and actor Don Cheadle at a panel talk in Soho's Apple Store. How a 2015 New York Times article catapulted the Street Dreams brand. What's next on the horizon, and much more. Please enjoy this conversation with Eric Veloso, one of the most forward-thinking, intentional, and energetically generous humans you'll ever meet. Eric Veloso, welcome to The Craft.
Thank you for having me. This is a very special moment.
I know, it really is. Well, I feel like every moment is very special with you when we have our conversations. So
Likewise.
Yeah.
It's definitely magic. So
It really is. There's a lot of idea making that happens
always
in our conversations.
like low-key alchemy.
Yeah, I love that.
Yeah.
Low-key alchemy.
For sure.
So I was connecting the dots yesterday on how we met. And we met 5 years ago when you and our mutual friend Smokey you had offices in the same building in Gastown, the Dominion building.
Yes, we did.
Yeah, and I remember he said, hey, come over and visit me. And I was like, yeah, no problem. Drop by the office, and you were sitting there.
Yep.
And Smokey, always the connector, he was like, you two need to talk. And we were like, okay. And then we had our one-on-one, maybe a couple weeks later. And then I think we had like an hours-long conversation.
Yeah, we definitely took Smokey up on the offer to talk.
Yeah.
And we sort of deep dove right off the jump. I think right off the jump, there's a kindred spirit type of feeling. I truly believe, going back to like the energy factor behind life, that we all sort of meet each other for a specific purpose.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's subjective in terms of obviously the way that things transpire in everyone's life. But I try to look at, keeping my energy sort of open to finding the people that I think will amplify something in my life. And you're definitely somebody that's come in and filled a little bit of a void. So it's a pleasure.
Aww.
And shout out to Smokey for the connection.
Yes, thank you,
And
Smokey.
shout out to the Dominion building. So that was like fifth floor Dominion building.
Yes.
We were there for 6 years.
Yeah.
And that was where we built a lot of ideas.
Yeah, we really did. And you and I have had so many conversations over the years. And we've been discussing ideas on, creativity, how to drive culture forward, community, and life, really.
Yeah.
We've talked a lot about like life and spirituality and philosophy. So we get real deep. And fun fact, about 5 years ago, I think 5 or 4, when the craft was just a whisper of an idea, you and I were chatting about the craft potentially being on Street Dreams Radio, which you hadn't yet launched yet.
Yeah, it was definitely just the same idea that you had in your mind was around the same time that we had manifested that idea as well.
Yeah. And then, a couple years passed, things got busy.
Yep.
And then now you're on the show. So it's so beautiful.
This is it. This is full circle.
Yes.
And it's amazing seeing like the growth since the moment that we met in terms of like that inception of the idea that you had for the craft. And of course things sort of maneuver in this like ebb and flow kind of I want to say system. So seeing it come to fruition and you being now 30 episodes deep and plus, it's a joy to see it come to life, and congratulations to you and all the guests that you've had so far, because it's an amazing journey to listen to as a fan as well. So
thank you.
Super honored to be here. So
thank you.
Thanks again.
And congrats on launching Street Dreams Radio too.
Yes.
What a big thing.
So that was a pandemic move. Obviously in 2020, a lot of us had to slow down and sort of refocus almost by default because we didn't have any other options. So in terms of us and Street Dreams Radio, it was always something that's been bubbling in the background because we have so much connection to music. Everyone on our team just has a deep affinity for everything sound related, including having a lot of DJs on our team as well, including myself, who've always sort of been into the subcultures of subcultures, and music has just always been like the tapestry that sort of is always present through everything. So even as a creative, you listen to music, you connect with it. So Street Dreams Radio, I think, was just like a full circle moment again of us being 6 years deep into the project, launching our web space, and beside that was Street Dreams Radio, which was basically the extension of the new media model that Street Dreams has endeavored upon. And really just naturally taking these steps into really creating all of these different tiers that Street Dreams represents through creativity in general and representing the art that we love.
Yes. And we will dive deep into Street Dreams.
Yeah.
We'll put a pin in this one. But I'd love to go back to you as a kid. And you were born in Calgary, but moved to Vancouver when you're 8 months old with your mother.
Yes.
Who had you quite young.
Yeah, she did.
Yeah. And your background is Chilean.
It is.
Yeah.
Shout out to Santiago, Chile. So my family, including my mother and 6 siblings and my grandparents, immigrated to Canada in the late 70s. Soon after, I was born to my mom and my father, and sort of grew up like the baby of the family in a lot of ways. Of course, my mom had me when she was 17, so it sort of kind of threw me into the mix of sort of just growing up with my aunts and uncles. The youngest one, Cecilia, who's only 9 years my elder. So I was always in this rambunctious, spicy Latino environment that had all these ebbs and flows of, music playing at all times, a lot of parties, a lot of emotions, a lot of inspiration. And I think I was really aware from an early age in terms of absorbing all the things around me in a manner that just created an identity in this imagination that would go wild at times, in terms of just sort of dreaming a lot as a kid. And I think that really transpired itself into, moving its way in and out of my life in a sort of like cohesive and uncohesive manner at times. But yeah, I owe everything to that upbringing. It was a beautiful place to grow up, and it really made me who I am. And as you know, the immigrant story is filled with hustle of all kinds. So that in and of itself is something that I wear, like a badge of honor in terms of making good on the, opportunity that my family afforded me to grow up in this environment and be blessed to be a Canadian and, do what it is that makes me happy. And it's all owed to the foundation that, these people built for us. Good and bad, it was always an experience. And I think that I owe a lot to the hustle.
I just, you were saying something and I wanted to ask you, you were talking about dreaming, what kind of things would you dream about as a kid?
I would always have very like spaced out dreams. I don't know if that makes sense, but yeah, always watching cartoons, growing up, reading comic books, just really being into like, things like science fiction and futuristic things from the beginning, like playing with robots, whether it be Transformers or GoBots, like all of these things that really made my imagination super hyperactive. I think translated in my dreams. So my very early sort of vivid dreams definitely had me, floating and flying through space and things of that nature. Then, Michael Jordan would be in a few dreams here and there, maybe some Wayne Gretzky dreams. But yeah, just everything that I saw, I think I kind of cue it up to me absorbing all of these things that, again, just go back to the genetic makeup that, happens once you start defining what your personality is. So I think all of these things just really added to this very vivid visual sense of how it is that I experience the world. And I was always a visual learner, like that in and of itself it was hard for me to be into math, but, show me some history with pictures and books, and I could really absorb that in a manner that really made sense to me. So I think in and of itself, the dreaming aspect of it, I think, is just built from all of these things that I think from an early age I was super obsessed with. So it was a really cool time to be alive, I think. Like in the 80s and the 90s.
Dream and and imagine,
for sure,
what a future looks like.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. And your mom, what was she like? I know she was a hustler, wasn't she?
She's amazing, yeah. So shout out to my mom, Fanny Veloso. She is the most hardworking, coolest woman that I know. So early on, she was always working and going to school and making better for herself. So I've always like watched her sort of get an inch and take a mile behind any opportunity that she had, and that in and of itself was super inspiring as a kid to just see, her always trying to build a better life for me, based around the idea of just giving me everything that I needed, but also giving me the space to be who I was without at times too many restrictions. But I want to say like more of like a freestyle approach to life where there weren't too many confinements for me as a kid, and like I want to say lack of structure, but I guess like general structure in terms of the idea of really feeling your way through the moments, and having a relationship with her was sort of like a brother and sister in a lot of ways. So we sort of grew up with each other in a lot of ways as well. So she's just been the person that I think just allowed me to be who I was, and that's including all the goods and bads, all the ups and downs, and allowing me the space to reflect what the greater purpose is by just having to find my way with her support firmly planted on my back at every moment and every curve. So I owe everything to her, and just everything that she inspired in me was also, a lot of culture, whether it be the music that she was listening to when I was growing up, things like Supertramp and the Rolling Stones and Def Leppard, and we could just go down the gambit of all these amazing things that I was experiencing with her, like whether it be going to the movies. Like those are the most vivid memories that I have of the times of us growing up. So she's gone on to have given me the opportunity to grow up for about 15 years as an only child, but then had my sisters Shania and Naisha 15 years after myself. And then shortly after that, my little brother Lester, who's 13. So my family has grown in a very, I want to say, not an unorthodox manner, but I guess in the way that it should have grown. So I'm very, very excited to now have younger siblings to inspire. And hopefully they see something in me that's just built through actions and a lot of, making it happen.
I'm sure they do. And your mom really did make it happen. She worked at the Sutton, I remember you saying.
Yeah, she did.
And she made her way up to entertainment director.
She did, yeah. So she was a maid at Sutton Place while she was, so prior to it being called Sutton Place, like throwback, it was called Le Meridian. And while she was going to school at VCC, I think finishing up her BA, she was working at Le Meridian as a maid. So she was, coming in and cleaning your rooms, knocking to make sure that it's housekeeping is here for a few years while she finished up school. And I think soon after that transitioned her way into a position within the sales, I want to say, division of Le Meridian. And then soon after that just hustled her way into like the entertainment sort of like department and worked her way to entertainment director. And this was in like the heyday of the Hollywood North boom in like the mid 90s. Yeah. So in and of itself, that sort of opened up like a whole opportunity for me to understand how that side of business worked in terms of like making movies, and also having a ton of perks through the process. So she would be able to, be like hanging out with Ice Cube one day because he's here filming a movie, or Johnny Depp when he was doing 21 Jump Street. So like she would actually be the person that would be there greeting everyone and making sure that their hospitality was set when they came into the hotel, and was really schmoozing and making sure the clients were super comfortable while they stayed for, sometimes 6 months at a time.
That's right.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it
they're
would be
filming.
So they actually had a long-term stay section at Le Méridien, which eventually turned into Sutton Place about 5 years after she got her position in entertainment director. So they have like apartments where like a lot of the top level talent would stay. So yeah, that in and of itself just opened me up into, I was always obsessed with films as a kid, like growing up, whether that be my favorite TV shows or just movies in general, like just replaying them over and over and just like always being obsessed with sort of, again, that visual aspect of what all these things were always inspiring me with. So
all kinds of film?
All kinds of film, yeah. I want to say, yeah, there's everything from Disney to just like the cartoons we used to watch, whether that be Bugs Bunny or, like these Looney Tunes.
Yes, I remember that.
Things.
Yeah.
So I can't think of, we could just do a whole podcast probably on me speaking about each film. So I don't want to dive into that rabbit hole too much, but everything that you could ever think of. So I was very interested. And I remember early on, maybe like at 13 years old, reading the credits and seeing what like a producer was and, asking her these questions. And that sort of sparked this potential sort of like inception point in my mind in terms of potentially exploring that, sometime in my future. In terms of trying to get into the film industry in some way, shape, or form.
Which is what you did.
I did.
Yeah.
So soon after high school, yeah.
Was that was when you had the apprenticeship in LA, right?
Yes,
for VIP, which was the show with Pamela Anderson Lee.
Yes, Tommy Lee's girl at the time, yeah. So basically after high school, I went into just understanding how to get my getting accredited to work in the film industry. So with my mom's connections, through the whole scope of everything that I was trying to learn about the film industry and how movies were made, I came upon this role called director of photography. And the director of photography is the person that obviously is actually there working with the directors to sort of set the scenes, whether that be the lighting, whether that be the time of day that the scene is shot, and having the picture set so that basically the director comes in and, creates the scenes and films perfectly for what it is that on the storyboard. So when I started learning about that, and coupled with my early obsession with photography, that's born out of just like family photo albums and always having somebody taking photos, during these times and looking through these albums, getting things printed, and just having the tangibility behind like these memories that were being created. So I think my affinity for photography specifically came from that early on aspect, that as it is a part of our lives now with our phones, early on in those times as well, like in the 80s and the 90s, you were documenting everything with film cameras and you would have to get them printed. So there was like you were always inundated with like 4x6 prints and negatives. So that I think was sort of my first affinity into that realm in terms of photography. Soon after that, started skateboarding, which was one of my really, really first like loves as a kid. And from there, stumbled upon photography one time that I busted my ankle trying to get into a skate bowl. And that's when my skate career ended, because I realized that I didn't have the pain threshold to be a skateboarder. But I get out of the park and sit down on a bench, and beside me was a Canon AE1 film camera. And from that moment on, it was probably grade 8. I started taking photos with film cameras and using skating as sort of like the first subject matter that I sort of focused on. I could do it with my friends. We could just hang out and just document things that were happening with one another. So that early on was sort of like I think the first inception point again for photography in my life, born out of like this obsessive magazine culture that I was in terms of magazine being the first forms of internet, and that being the way that you experienced everything prior to the World Wide Web being active. So always inundated with physical and tangible items that preserved memories or communicated culture to me in some way, shape, or form. CDs, tapes, vinyl. All of these things that you held.
Yeah, I was thinking about it because I was like, I don't think I've ever asked Eric this, but I wanted to know. I'm curious exactly what it is about photography that you love so much. Is it like setting up the shot? Is it like the result? Is it everything? Like I don't think we've ever really dove into.
I don't think
like why you truly love it.
It's the spontaneity. It's there's a famous photographer, which I'm sure a lot of people are familiar with, and his name is Henri Cartier-Bresson. And he has this, I don't want to call it theory, but a context for the way that he had so many gems in terms of how he framed photography as the art that it is. And one of the things that he sort of lived by was a motto, or I guess a saying or a context called the decisive moment. And this is me learning a lot about him specifically when I did my art history program during my photography years. And basically, the decisive moment is sort of that idea of connecting your mind. When you take a photo and you press the shutter, it's a connection of your mind, your heart, and your spirit, all in this instantaneous moment of just watching something happen and choosing to encapsulate it by that click of the shutter, but always shooting with intention. And sometimes, like, his approach was finding frames and standing there for hours at a time and just waiting for the decisive moment for him to happen. So the patience of understanding, of just observing. And I think this goes back to, again, just my upbringing. I was always observing. I was observing the adults that were, around me at all times. I was observing my family and what they did. I was observing my school life and, always entering rooms and feeling like I was very sort of cognizant of things that were happening. So I was, again, going back to the aspect of visual learning. I think it was always just there, like computing images at all times. So that in and of itself, I think, is where the love came from. So yeah, it's the approach of, I'm a street photographer at heart. So I love just roaming the streets and being able to just look at things and observe them and, immortalize them through my lens. I'm a very private photographer. So I'm not really shooting street photography in the sense of taking portraits of people on the streets or, shooting from a distance and getting people in frame a lot. I really think
it's like a moment.
Yeah, it's a moment and like the space in and of itself. I'm trying to capture like the quietness of life. I'm trying to, transmit how still things are and trying to find like the empty moments through, like the craziest city streets. So sometimes shooting in New York and like standing on the block and just waiting until it completely clears out. So you can just have that frame in and of itself by itself is something that I search for. So it's the quiet moments. I think that counteracts a lot of like the hyperactive thoughts that I have. So photography came in as like the medium to allow me to sit down, focus, look at things, and kind of calm down how fast my mind moves at times. So that, and I think transitioning back to the director of photography role that I got soon after high school, did my film courses and hopped on a plane and went to LA to do, a small apprenticeship with Brian England was his name from VIP. And it was kind of like a dream sort of like scenario to be able to go do that. But soon into the apprenticeship, I realized that I wasn't in the headspace to understand how to sort of like take direction. And I kind of left it behind. I sort of like dipped my toes into it, but I don't think I was ready to sort of dive into like the full smorgasbord of what that entailed in terms of sort of like the discipline and I guess the direction that you needed to take in that role. I've always been an independent thinker, so I didn't never want to be told what to do.
Yes.
So that counteracted a little bit. So that sort of like led me on the path of sort of coming back to Vancouver, working in the film industry for another 5 years as a production assistant. So I worked with a commercial agency that produced a lot of car advertisements. So that was my daytime gig for about 4 years, just working on set through every aspect of it, learning the ins and outs of the film industry.
But it burnt you out too, didn't it?
It did.
Yeah.
It's a very tough, demanding schedule. So, that got to the point where I felt like had reached my bandwidth level in terms of how much I wanted to keep doing that. So, soon after that, left the film industry behind and just got a regular job at Aritzia in their distribution center. And this was through my my girlfriend at the time, wife now, Celine, who has been working at Aritzia for close to, I think, if I'm not mistaken, I don't want to say it wrong, 10 plus years. So she...
Long time.
Yeah, a long time, and amazing company to work for. I've seen her, really develop herself in a manner that's inspired me to, get my shit together and make sure that I can equal the amount of dedication that she has to her craft. So, went to work a regular job, just in retail distribution for about 4 years.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And then you had a moment, didn't you, where you were like, is this what I want to do? And it was actually Celine that posed the question to you.
Very true.
If you could do anything right now, what would you be doing?
Yeah. So I got to the point where I think my bandwidth level was hit too in that moment. So for me, it's always been sort of like this path of the most resistance at times. I know some people say take the path with the least resistance, but I'm hard-headed, so I want to take the path that it's the hardest, and I'm ready to take the bumps and bruises. And I'm only just saying this now in terms of a lot of life lessons and trying to figure out the why. I think that's very important to me.
Yeah. Where do you get that from? Like wanting to take the road less traveled?
Coming from an immigrant family. I mean, it goes back to that, like we had to watch our parents, if they come from a different country, just hustle for everything that they needed, so whether it be learning a new language, whether it be integrating themselves into a society that at times didn't want them here. It's figuring out the why is important, because I think that that's what we do without sometimes knowing it. But growing up in a family that had every level of hustle in the mix, from the highest level of excess to the lowest level of unfortunate circumstances, it's the why was important to me, because I think I was just trying to figure out a way not to make those same mistakes. So if that was something that I could sort of find within sometimes chaotic things, within myself more than anything, and obviously surrounding circumstances, but very early on, I think I started to figure out that I needed to change things in order to sort of flip the script a little bit, because if not, then we keep repeating the same things over and over. And unfortunately, sometimes that leads into this generational cycle of these things that at times could be self-destructive. So for me, and my mental health and all these battles that I've had with understanding my emotions and how to moderate that, creativity was really always the way for me to understand that I had a purpose, and that was my why. So going back to the Aritzia times, I was sitting in my car before my shift every morning and just having to sort of like propel myself into there, and kind of feeling a little bit down because I felt that I had painted myself into a corner. Not knocking the process, because I had excelled in that career as well. I had a good paying job. It was super stable, but I felt unfulfilled. So during those days, I just took this leap of faith where one day I just came in and I quit. And I told Celine and my friends that I was going to go back to school for photography, because I thought that was going to be the way for me to sort of backtrack and understand what my why was. And it made me sort of be off track in order to find myself to the right track. So photography in a lot of ways saved my life. And through that, found a path to sort of, again, get an inch and take a mile with it. And the timing was perfect for a lot of things that sort of are serendipitous in a lot of ways, and sort of very cosmic in terms of...
this is where Street Dreams came.
Yeah, this is where Street Dreams came. And I think it finally got to the point where in 2006, when my grandfather passed away, who was basically like the patriarch of our family, when he passed away, that sort of shook me to the core in a lot of ways, but it made me also validated in a lot of things that I believed through experiences that happened with him during his transition and ever since. So even though it sucked, obviously, I give the biggest thanks to him, because I think in that moment is when a switch really flipped in my head, where it was like, at that point I was being super passive, where I was waiting for things to happen to me. And when he passed away, something jarred in my system to validate what it is that I had been almost driving myself crazy, because I believed in it so deeply, to understand that I needed to go out and get it. And in and of that moment, that sort of led me into that stage where it all culminated with me sitting in the car half an hour before my shift, saying, I got to do something different. And during those times, just finding like little social media platforms that were allowing me to start sharing my photography, that sort of like reignited the passion for the reason why I was actually going to start doing it. So started with Tumblr, and then it moved into Twitter, and then Instagram was a platform that launched in 2010. And then from there, that sort of was the vehicle that allowed me to find my new family, my new business partners, and a whole new career that has fulfilled so much and is continuously still evolving till this day.
Yeah, and you were able to build a digital community, but a community nonetheless.
Yes.
And it's been incredible what you guys have done in terms of even giving other photographers a voice and an ability for their work to be seen.
Yeah.
Through the hashtag community building that you guys were doing.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And it was built off that. So I go to school in 2011 to do my photography certification at Langara College. So it's about a 3-year program. So during that time, so for me, going back to school for photography was, I've always been inspired, and I've always been super obsessed with everything: art, design, culture, related sports. Super, super heavily obsessed with just looking at reference at all times. When I was growing up, collecting magazines, like the walls in my room were no white space. Like it was completely filled up with everything that I loved. So there's been a deep obsession for us in terms of the things that we're inspired by culturally that spans every aspect of art. So being a Canadian kid, kind of growing up, sometimes there was a little bit of a lack of identity in terms of things that we were looking at around us that inspired us. So I think also the British connection to British Columbia specifically, the UK, and having the Queen on our money already had us sort of tuned into that side of the world. So already, like, I was always looking at London, Japan, New York, Berlin, LA, Barcelona. Like these were places that inspired me, and I think my personality and my taste level right from the jump, because we were always looking at these environments. And I say we, including my co-founder Mike C, who's my counterpart here in Vancouver. We've just been like obsessively just looking at everything that inspired us. So I think our taste level in terms of what it is that we knew we wanted to do was already there. So for me in photography, I had all these images in my mind that I already wanted to create. Like I knew how I wanted to shoot. I knew how to define a style for myself based off all the inspiration that I had from the things that I looked at obsessively.
Yeah.
So going back to school was just learning the technical side of like, how do you light? How do you use studio equipment? How do you, compose? So for me, the best courses during my time in the photography courses at Langara was composition and design, which basically our teacher came in and he basically said, here you're going to try to learn why you do what you do. So that idea of composition and design was just like blew my mind, because it contextualized a lot of the things that I was already doing as a photographer. But now seeing that there was an actual theory to it, I was mind blown, because it connected a lot of things in my head. So I was like, holy shit, this is an aha moment. I understand how I'm designing my photos. I understand why I like looking for hard shadows and using that as like a composition tool for a lot of the frames that I like to shoot. And then the second one was art history. So going back to the Henri Cartier-Bresson mention, art history blew my mind, because you basically learn the entire process of photography from the very first photo that was taken to, what's happening now. So early on, when you understand what people were doing with the most rudimentary tools and how they made photographs in 1900, it really instilled something in my mind in terms of never being super hyper aware of like, what kind of camera you're using, or the latest gear, or I have to have all these lenses. Like I understood that if you have a phone in your pocket, or whatever it is that you have, like a point and shoot film camera, whatever camera that you can get your hands on, it's 1,000 times better than anything that anybody had in the past. So that instilled into me, like again, another deep intention of how it is that I approach photography. So I sort of shoot like a film photographer in a lot of ways, where I shoot film, but when I use my digital cameras, for example, like I'm always trying to be super conscious of how it is that I shoot my frames. Like sometimes I'll only take like a 8 gigabyte card where you can only shoot 120 pictures, and really look at the intention of what it is that I was inspired by in the art history side. So through all of this, my P's and Q's are starting to be set. Me and Mike C move in together, and we start using Tumblr as sort of like this collaboration tool for us to take my photography and his graphic design skills, including his nephew Ray, who's a huge part of our team as well, who now lives in London and works for Mr. Porter. So really amazing path that he's taken. But anyways, we started using Tumblr as like an online magazine of us sort of like sound clashing with each other. So I had my own inspiration blog called No Look Pass. And then I started a Tumblr blog called Street Dreams for my own street photography, because I was like contextualizing what it is that I was doing and just sharing my work. And then Mike and Ray were running an online site called Really Dope. And Really Dope was basically an online magazine, just layouts of things that we love, album reviews, just like super conceptual things done by us in-house. And then I started adding my photography to it. So all of this culmination of things are happening. I'm in my film program, and my wife Celine ends up moving to New York City to open Aritzia stores there when they took their first sort of leap into the U.S. market. So she was living in New York for a while, and that's what started my rabbit hole sort of like into finding Instagram as this place that was an entry level into networking and understanding that there's a way to take digital communities and grow them, but also flip the script and take all the abundance of work that's being shared on digital channels and start a magazine with it. And that was sort of like the genesis of our idea.
It's so incredible. And I'm just thinking about all you're saying about, the Tumblr and we're the same age. And I was actually doing, probably around the same time you were doing that, I was doing the same thing because we had these new tools. So you remember when Blogspot was the big thing. So MySpace, I had a blog that I started called Confessions of a Fashion Fanatic. And I was doing the same thing. I was just posting things that were really inspiring me. So it'd be like, a lot of it was fashion, obviously, but there was photography, there was music. I was categorizing little things on each blog. Like it would be the main blog, and then I'd have these 2 little subsections in the copy. I had so much fun doing that because it gave me this new medium to express myself. And I actually got work from it. I remember getting this message one day and I'm like, what?
Yes.
Someone had actually really liked how I was curating my blog, and they offered me a fashion freelance writer position at Hollywood Life magazine for their online version. And I was like, what? Where did this come from?
Yes.
But, I was just putting myself out there. This is me. This is what I like. And actually my current website right now is a Tumblr, and I still use it. Like every couple of days I'll be like, what's inspiring me today? And I'll post it, or maybe like a repost of someone else's Tumblr. But it's an amazing anthology of even yourself. I like to like go back and see like what my likes were,
Totally.
I don't know, months ago, even years ago.
Look at the growth.
To look at the growth and just look at the interests.
Or maybe non-growth.
Or non-growth, yeah. Like, and so I think it's so special that we came up at a time where we had these tools to do that.
And it's all for the love.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I think separated it from it, because it gave you this access point to, for me, everything that I do as like what I share on social media channels, even till this day, is just like a personal visual diary for myself that is based off of that.
Mm-hmm.
It's like I'm doing this for myself in terms of expressing things that I want to share visually. And it's cool that other people will like them, but really in and of itself, it's just an expression of having a place to just let that go. And it was a renaissance period in terms of giving us the access point to connect with people that we wouldn't have ever connected with based on visual culture and learning visual literacy. I mean, there's always like the ebbs and flows, and obviously like the good and bad side of it, because there's people who, use it differently than maybe that we were inspired to use it. But it's about obsession. It's about like really knowing what you love and expressing that wholeheartedly through every thought and action that you have.
Mm-hmm.
And that's, I think very important to keep in our hearts as we move forward, because a lot of things I think out there are trying to skew the conversation in the other manner, where it's sort of like this very fast food type of mentality where, you can be one way one day and then the next day you can be completely different. But I think the identity is what really drives forward culture, and understanding who you are and expressing that in a manner that might inspire others to sort of find their own identity through that.
Yeah. And Street Dreams was going to be digital first.
Yes.
But then there was this incredible story of how it ended up being print.
It's again another serendipitous moment. So going back to the times when my wife Celine moves to New York, I started using Instagram. I'm finishing up my photography courses at that point, and I'm presenting my final portfolio to industry professionals who they bring in for the review to kind of give you feedback and just, give you, I guess, a taste of what the real world is like in terms of having people critique your work and say things about it. So you walk into these environments, and obviously there's sort of like, I grew up in I love punk music. I've always been sort of it's not establishment, not to the point of like being disrespectful, because I'm a super respectful 12-year Catholic kid that went to private school. And coming up from a Latino family, like there's a lot of respect built into everything that you do. So not disrespectful in any way, but really against the idea of somebody telling me something that maybe I don't agree with. So sort of like you have this standoffish sort of approach where, you know, you walk into a room and there's, you know, 6 men sitting there, and there's no diversity in the room whatsoever right off the jump. So you understand sort of like what you're walking into, and that has an energy to it. So I remember presenting my portfolio and them asking pointed questions like, oh, so what do you want to do? Like, where do you want to work? So I rambled off a bunch of publications. I'm like, yo, I'm going to shoot for Vogue. I'm going to shoot for Thrasher magazine. I'm going to shoot for National Geographic someday in my life. Those are aspirations that I have. Like, I want to have a portfolio that's diverse enough so that I can do all of those things, because that's what I felt like my human mixtape of everything that I experienced and then came out as an output as a photographer was based on creating a diverse body of work and trying to show you that I can do it all and not, you know, limit myself to only being a certain kind of photographer. And that came from just seeing, you know, what other people were doing, and again, the inspiration from just constantly looking at work at all times. And I think that's the biggest thing for creatives, is like you have to look at reference and not copy it, but be inspired by it to create your own iteration of it through your lens or your craft or your paintbrush. You know, I think that's really important. So Celine goes to New York, I present my portfolio. They basically give me some feedback saying like, oh yeah, maybe one day you can be a photographer, because, you know, Vancouver is a small city and only a certain level of photographers get all the jobs. So I took that feedback and I was like, okay, cool. You know, obviously I don't agree with it. I liked, you know, it was cool just experiencing it, but in and of itself, it sort of unlocked this Pandora's box of me understanding how social media was going to become a way for me and my team to find individuals that could help us alchemize something that's for ourselves, and that namely being a publication. So going back to my down and out stage, my wife Celine sat me down prior to taking the leap of faith of going back to school for photography. I had a really you know, deep conversation with Celine, and she basically asked me a question, and she said, what would you do if you could walk into any job right now and get the position? What would you do? And sat down and stopped for a second, and then I said, a magazine editor. I said, if I had the chance to become a magazine editor, then I would really fuck it up. Like, I know how to sort of direct this, you know, tapestry of different sort of emotions through print, and it was something that I've always been inspired by. So going back to the Tumblr and seeing all these images and all that stuff sort of alchemized this idea of me saying a publication would be amazing, because we were already doing it online, but I really thought that if I could take the reins of something, then I could really lead it to like the promised land. So fast forward, Celine goes to New York. I start traveling back and forth a little bit more, and then started to see on Instagram that there was this amazing community of photographers being built in New York City. Very akin to me, like the graffiti movement that was happening in like the 70s and the 80s. And this idea of like bombing the streets and subway cars and crews and linking up with one another, and people having like these photographic personalities, and just seeing like this influx of community being built on the East Coast of America. So lo and behold, Celine moves to New York. So during the time, I started going through the rabbit hole of understanding that there's ways to sort of connect with people through hashtags and communities that could be built on specific forms of photography, or, you know, just, I guess, different themes that you could build through, you know, hashtags on the Instagram platform. So going through the rabbit hole, I stumbled upon something called 16:9 Vibes, and it had a bunch of posts by this dude named Steve Sweatpants. And I was mind blown. I was like, yo, who is this dude? Like, he had these colorful captions that were attached to every post. And it was just the most New York character that I'd ever come across. Just like on the, you know, this amazing thing that was now opening up again, like this Pandora's box of just like connecting with people and seeing. I'm really obsessed with the idea of like, if you connect with people through visual culture, then you're learning a lot about what they have inside. And I think there's an affinity that's built through the idea that we can look at pictures because it speaks and is capturing things that are very personal, and certain people have an emotion attached to it, because as a photographer, I feel like you eventually start just having a spirit to the way that your photography is being shared. So right off the jump, I'm like, this is a New York's like movie character. It's hilarious. So lo and behold,
and his captions are hilarious.
They are, right?
They're so random.
They're and they're literally things that he experiences on a daily basis. So he has a notepad out, and he notes on his phone, and he's basically just jotting down all the conversations that he'll come through a day. So yeah, so anyways, lo and behold, Celine was working with somebody who had a connection to this dude named AJ Albano, and he's a Filipino from Staten Island. So he's a barber and vintage curator, and he had just opened studio space in Brooklyn. So basically, I get connected with AJ. Celine's like, yo, you got to meet AJ. He's super cool. I know you guys are going to vibe out so much. So get connected with AJ through email. Lo and behold, through my rabbit hole searching, I realized that Steve and AJ were following each other on Instagram. So I was going back to New York for a trip in September, and asked AJ to link us up through email, because I was like, yo, if you can link me up with Steve, it would be awesome to meet with him, and maybe we can go shoot some photos or just like link up. So at the time, of course, we're doing all this Tumblr stuff, and we have an online magazine that we've been running. So that idea of magazine was always incepted in my mind. And then finishing up my courses, figuring out what's next for me was, okay, cool, we're going to do something on our own. Or I had like at least the ambition to say, I'm going to take the leap of faith of getting out of my introverted sort of ways, because I'm introverted by nature, but extroverted out of necessity. And again, going back to that moment of understanding that I had to go get it, I broke out of my shell a little bit and was reaching out more, because it just felt like something that I needed to do to see if it was, worth, if the grass is greener on the other side. So take that trip to New York, meet up with Steve, and we meet at a party of AJ's. He compliments me on my shoes before these Visvims that I was wearing, that we didn't even know that we were meeting each other spontaneously prior to actually being introduced to one another. So instantly with Steve, there was already a chemistry that was off the jump that sort of like validated why we were connecting with one another. So we basically make a plan to meet up the next day, and we walk all through Brooklyn, over the Williamsburg Bridge, into Chinatown, LES, all over the place for about 8 hours, and getting to know one another. So so on our way back to Brooklyn, we're on the Williamsburg Bridge, and we're taking photos. And I remember the moment when I asked him, I was just like, yo, Steve, I'm like, I have this idea for maybe putting together like work where maybe we can, take your photography from New York, obviously you're from here, and take my photography from New York, and maybe we can put together like a digital magazine that features both of our work, and we can call it like, Eric Veloso versus Steve Sweatpants. Steve had actually started his own Tumblr where he was actually doing that already, where he was, doing photo walks with like a homie, and it would be Steve plus Jose Silva, or Steve plus Dave Krugman, amazing photographers from New York who are some of the first people that we work with. So prior to that, like what inspired me is, again, New York was already gaining community from it. So I was looked at it, and I'm like, yo, if we could potentially connect with people in New York City to make it the vehicle for these, Vancouver kids coming out here and making some noise, I think that this could be a really valid way for us to connect and use Instagram as a way to sort of create a whole new voice for photography, but also kind of like incept culture in a manner that could be super, super advantageous to everybody who might be inspired by it. So I'll wrap up the story quickly. So we basically stand on the bridge, and I ask him if I could get some of his photography. So I get back to Vancouver with a hard drive with Steve's photos on it. Me and Mike work on the first iteration of Street Dreams, because that was the name of my Tumblr. So I was like, yo, Mike, let's call it Street Dreams. And I told Steve that on the bridge. I'm like, I think we should call it Street Dreams. He's like, yo, that's dope. Let's put it together. So me and Mike.
And can you tell listeners the meaning behind Street Dreams?
Yeah. So Street Dreams is, for me, there's multiple meanings. So for me, the reason why I chose it to start my street photography Tumblr as the name Street Dreams was because I felt, as a street photographer at heart, for me, what I was doing was like living out my dreams. So the idea of like the combination of Street Dreams was really the idea of like putting your foot to the pavement every day and making your dreams happen. Like whether we're rich or poor, we all walk the same streets and we all dream. So that became like this motto that I think just translated into the idea of using Street Dreams to become the main foundation for how Mike, myself, and Steve could collaborate to take digital work on Instagram and potentially put it as a cohesive piece that was curated, that was art focused, that was based on the work, and put it out for the community. So we start this magazine that we're going to put out digitally at first. So it's just going to be mine and Steve's work. We stay up to like 7 a.m. one night, work directly for like 14 hours to do the first iteration of Street Dreams, Mike and I in his apartment in Richmond. So 2 days after we finish it, we send it to Steve. We're all super hyped on it. We're like, cool, okay, cool. We're going to start using this hashtag. So I was like, Steve, let's start using Pound Street Dreams Mag as like our hashtag. So whenever we post on Instagram, let's just start throwing it up. So slowly, like as the process of us putting together Street Dreams, we started using this tag. So it was kind of like out in the open, and people were even hitting Steve up, asking him like, yo, what's Street Dreams Mag? He's like, chill. Like you'll know soon enough. So we started the hashtag in between all this like alchemy of creating it. So we are going to put out a digital magazine 2 days after we finish it. We go to Fortune Sound Club. Shout outs to G-Man. one random night, and I'm standing waiting to get a drink, and I get tapped on the shoulder by an old high school friend that I hadn't seen in years. And basically, you know, you start talking about obviously the catch-up moments. So you're like, hey, what are you up to? He asked me. And I said, you know, I went back to school for photography. I'm really trying to do this photography thing. And I've been traveling back and forth to New York a lot, and super inspired to kind of just like start this, you know, new career for myself. So lo and behold, I asked him what he'd done. And he said, his answer was, oh, me and my cousin, we bought a print shop. So there was this like aha moment where right in the moment, I sort of just like stood back, and I was like in awe of like
the serendipity
of it. So instantly I asked him, I was just like, yo, do you think there's any way that I can show you what it is that we're doing? And maybe there's potentially a way that we can, you know, put together a print publication or like bring this to life as a physical magazine. He said, yeah, man, like, you know, hit him up the next week. Super excited. I tell Mike and Steve, I'm just like, yo guys, I think that we can actually turn this into something a little bit bigger. So what if we actually reformat the look and the feel of the magazine, but ask more photographers to be a part of it? So my initial idea was just like, if we could take 6 photographers from New York City to submit their photography work, and all of them have like, you know, a decent follower count on Instagram, like, you know, 20K, and a combined follower count of, let's say, 50,000 followers between all 6 photographers. If we can get like 5 to 10% of that audience, maybe we can sell like 100 magazines. So that was sort of like the genesis of the idea. So we got together and put together the first edition of Street Dreams with 6 photographers. It took about 3 months to the look and the feel, the paper stock, like the redefinition of Street Dreams. So it ended up, our intention with it was to take all this amazing work that we were sort of like seeing on digital sources, bring it to physical, but create like an art gallery in your hands. Make it super minimal, make it about like this white canvas for us to sort of then take the connotation away from street, because there's also like that urban connotation to street in the sense of it being sort of like, you know, subcultures, or maybe has like a negative.
Unrefined,
exactly. So shout out to Street Etiquette as well, started by Joshua Kissy and Travis Gums in New York City during the time. And they had started like this gentleman's club, sort of like celebrating Black excellence through male figures, really well-dressed, you know, individuals, and just like the courtyard of like a government housing building. So Street Etiquette too really inspired us, and we've become friends with Josh and Steven. Josh have crazy history from them being in like the Hypebeast message boards back in the day, just like
no way,
and Supreme lineups in New York City. So that was also the emphasis too, was just like, let's take away the connotation from street and make it art. So we put out the first edition of Street Dreams. We get it into print and do like 150 copies of it, put it out on Instagram, and it sells out instantly in about like 7 hours. And we knew from there that we had something to really build with. Yeah.
And then that turned into, I wanted to talk about the moment you knew that Street Dreams was something, that was some sort of movement. And I think it was issue 3 where you guys did a magazine curated by Jeff Staple.
Yes.
And one of his colleagues. Was it the director of marketing?
Yeah, director of marketing, Anna Sian.
Yes,
Shout out to Anna.
yes.
She's a wonderful person.
Yes. And then you had an event at Reed Space Gallery in the Lower East Side.
Yes.
And that story is incredible.
Yeah, that's the wave. So we put out issue 1, 100 copies, sells out. We start getting like this influx of photographers using the hashtag and really becoming part of the community. So instantly off the jump, it became like this sort of like genre defining moment in terms of, again, what was being built is that, like, you know, I say Instagram, and a lot of people have their own subjective approach to what Instagram is. And it's not about social media. It was just more about having the platform to connect with one another and having a place for us to share work. So that never knocked for me it just being mobile photography, or, you know, some people are just taking photos of whatever. For me, it was like, yo, people are actually using this tool to build photography careers. So if we can be at the cusp of it and give people a place to not be told no. And that comes back to that gatekeeper conversation you have with people standing in front of you telling you maybe one day you can be in a magazine. That redefined the idea of us starting our own publication, because we were going to say, on the punk rock side of things, fuck it, like, this is for everybody. Like, if we're going to open up the back door, we're going to keep it open for as long as we can to get everybody in. Like, you know, so we started like taking this amazing approach to it. So we basically, in issue 2, we opened up the page count and we took 6 photographers, but then we started doing hashtag pages. So gallery grids of people's work that was being shared on Street Dreams Mag. So now you can share your work on Street Dreams Mag, the hashtag, and be in the publication in the gallery grid with
So
like
smart.
over hundreds of photos. So it started gaining traction and traction to this day. Now Street Dreams Mag, 6 years into using it, is just a little under 13 million posts. So the influx of sort of like this defining moment for what that became as a tool for people to now have an output for it without even knowing it. Now you have 12-year-old kids who never grew up with a magazine wanting to be in a magazine. It was printed on a limited run, so then it became like how we always collected magazines, limited. Only 200 people are going to get this. So it became like this cult kind of
item,
yeah, within one issue to the next. So issue 2 comes out, we get featured by Hypebeast. That was a huge moment because during the time Hypebeast was like the validator of a lot of things that were like current culture. That happens, we get hit up by Eugene and Alex, who were at Hypebeast at the time, and we're like connecting with them. Mark Brand, an amazing person who's obviously an alumni of the craft, got in contact with me through a writer for High Snobiety at the time. His name was Chris Danforth, who's from Vancouver. And he saw Street Dreams, hit me up. He's like, yo, I really want to check this out. So linked up with him, gave him a copy. He tells me, I got to give this to Mark Brand because you got to meet Mark. He's like an amazing mentor of mine and just like a friend. Gives it to Mark. He sees issue 2 and we basically, issue 1, and we basically strike up this conversation with Mark. And we're like, he had a gallery at the time called Catalog at the old Tinseltown. And he loved what we were doing, was all about it. And he gave us our first show at the Catalog Gallery. So issue 2 was jumped off in Vancouver on a low-key show at the Catalog Gallery. About 100 people came out, but it created the template for us to create like a gallery exhibit model template for how it is that we can do Street Dreams events. So going back to the sort of the approach of it, we're like, okay, we're going to feature photographers from all over different cities. Now let's start going into different cities and just focusing on specific photographers from that community and making up the makeup to just be a show about them. So if it's LA edition, New York edition, Japan edition, we just bring it here and create the canvas. But it's really about these amazing photographers who are just under the Street Dreams sort of umbrella, and we're just here to propel it so that people can interact with it. So we do issue 2, create a template for it. During the time, we all have a conversation together, and Mike and Steve and I, and we thought to ourselves, we're like, okay, cool. If there's any store in New York that we can get Street Dreams into, what store would it be? And right off the jump, in unison, we all said Reed Space, because Reed Space was that place where Jeff Staple, shout out to Jeff, who's an amazing friend and mentor as well for Steve and the team in general. But what he had created with Reed Space was sort of like this multi-tiered approach to how he approached creativity. He was a shoe-wear designer. He had a retail space that carried all these brands, was like a hub for the community in New York City in the Lower East Side. So Steve would always hang out at Reed Space, and it was always this place where nobody kicked you out. Like you could be there chilling, looking at the magazines and just chopping it up with the staff. And it was really like this cultural hub for people to just like be around, you know, what Jeff and his team were curating. So Steve cold walks into the Reed Space when we drop issue 2. We do the show here in Vancouver. He approaches the managers and he's like, yo, I got this magazine. He's like, would there be any way that I could get it to be placed in here? So they say yes. They take it on consignment. I think 10 copies. And they're like, yeah, if, you know, obviously consignment works. If it sells, you get the money back and we do a split. Cool. Super gas. So from there, Steve gets invited to Agenda, which is a trade show in New York City, like a big cultural trade show. So this is when issue 2's out. And we had already released it. It's in Reed Space. Serendipitous happens again, and Steve meets Jeff Staple and Anna, who were at Agenda, because I think Staple had a booth there or something. So they start chopping it up, and Steve asked them from there. He's just like, hey, do you guys think you guys could become guest editors for the next edition of the magazine, because we really want to do a New York show. So at that point, we're already preset about saying, like, we're going to go to issue 3 in the fall of, I forget what year, 2015, and drop the magazine there. So Steve strikes up this conversation with Jeff and Anna, and they agree to be in the magazine. So then we concoct this idea. We're just like, yo, we should ask them if we can do the actual drop at Reed Space. So they're super down for it. Jeff and Anna curate a whole grid for Staple Pigeon hashtag. So we prepare to do issue 3, put together another amazing edition, heavily focused on New York photographers, because we're going to the city. So we set up at Reed Space, and Reed Space isn't a huge retail space. It probably fits about like 80 people comfortably. So they basically clear everything out. We start setting up on the walls, putting up our first gallery show in New York City. There was amazing photographers from London who would come in for the show, just people that we knew in our network that were already sort of like started to gravitate towards like these Street Dreams events that we were creating. So so we start setting up the show. Me and Mike mid setup. he made a bet, and he's just like, yo, he's like, if more than 100 people come today, he said, because I didn't think 100 people were going to show up. So he's like, if more than 100 people show up, you owe me Shake Shack. So Shake Shack at the time, Shake Shack was like mind blowing when you first had it in New York City. Like the early days of Shake Shack was just like, this is the greatest burger ever. So it was a really big thing to be like, okay, cool, let's do it. I thought like 70 people are going to show up. So boom, boom, we're setting up the show. The doors are supposed to open at 7:00. Don't even have a chance to look outside. People are coming in. We're scrambling to put up prints. Our thumbs are hurting from like all the tacks that we're using in the wall. Have stacks of Street Dreams magazine, issue 3 out. And then all of a sudden, I remember Steve taps me on the shoulder. He's like, yo, you got to go look outside. And so this is like 5 minutes before the doors open. Put up the last print, come outside, open it up. And I remember clear as day, going back to the dreams, it felt like this foggy, like New York moment that just came out of like everything that I'd ever watched, ever read about New York City. It came outside and you saw the street flooded with 600 people all waiting to get into the Street Dreams issue 3 event. So mind blasted. We're like, okay, cool. We're going to open up the doors. We open up the doors, floods with people. 15 minutes into the drink, I remember in the back bar, I was about to get a PBR because they had a ton of PBR that just got sponsored for the event. All of a sudden I'm getting it. The homie's opening it up, cracks it. And all of a sudden at the corner of my eye, I see the store manager from Reed Space get up on a table. And she starts saying, yo, everybody needs to start clearing out now. Go out this back route because the NYPD is here and the show is shut down. So this is 15 minutes into the doors opening. So lo and behold, the NYPD comes through because it got called because there were 600 people on the streets just for something. So they come through. I'm talking about like straight from the movies, plain clothes, the detectives holding up their badges, asking what's going on here. We're just like, yo, it's just a photo show. Like just pictures on the wall and there's a magazine for sale. Like that's all it is. There's nothing more. Like it's nothing nefarious happening here. But lo and behold, that moment happened, solidified. Like we're stunned. We all just chill on the street for hours after that. But that solidified like the movement of Street Dreams becoming sort of like this key thing of shutting down New York.
Yeah.
And I mean, if y'all know New York, like it's the Mecca. So if you can make noise there, and which was the intention of all of this, that was the solidification moment of understanding that we really have something here. And it's something that we're going to be able to harness for a short amount of time. But as we do it right, we're going to be able to transition into forever. And lo and behold, there's only been 2 times that Reed Space ever got shut down in its history. RIP Reed Space because it shut down last year during the pandemic. So that location isn't there, but I'm sure Jeff and the team will pop up somewhere else soon in the near future. But there's only been 2 times that the store got shut down. And once was when Jeff released his staple dunks, which is like the most iconic dunk ever, the pigeon dunks, shut down. The only the second time was Street Dreams.
Was you guys, yeah.
And that in and of itself was like this moment, which is like, yo, okay, we got to do this. So issue 4, we got a huge space, had 1,000 people come rock out with us.
And New York Times article in 2015.
That's crazy. So that was built off of that.
Amazing.
So the cultural moment shifting that happened at Reed Space and the idea that we got put on the map with us just like, we became a publication for the new generation of photography that was being built. But at the same time, bridging the gap between the past and the present, because we always knew, coming from our art history backgrounds, coming from culture, like this is deep in terms of understanding, paying homage to the fact that you really need to love and obsess about things and bridge the gap, because this is not disrespectful. This is about culture and understanding that we're now have a voice to curate how it is that we look at art. So the goal from the jump was just giving an equal space to saying, like, if you're shooting for 20 minutes, 20 hours, 20 years, we can all share the same magazine space. So we knew that we were always going to start looking at like the different tiers of photographers. Culminated with that, we always gave space to it being an equal featuring of 6 photographers, 3 males and 3 females, because this is not the dude show. I grew up around amazingly strong women. All of us were born to brilliant mothers and understand the balance of how that needs to be respected. And it's never been something that we ever wanted to look past, because the photography community in general and art, I want to say, is a little bit male dominated, specifically photography. It's the old white man game. So everything we did was just like, yo, if it's going to be 6 photographers after issue 1, we're like 3 females, 3 males, and just like start spreading the net in terms of just having people from different environments culminating themselves into sharing this work. And then we can then start looking at culminating each edition going forward with like the photographers in different levels of their career. So an, you know, really beginner career, a mid-career artist, and then a really established artist. So issue 4 happened, had 1,000 people come out and rock with us, another gangbuster show. The photography community is like super, super hyped. Like we're hyped because we're going to New York. We have this whole new family. It's like we're living our dreams. So lo and behold, I think somebody that attended the party was like an amateur photographer and who had a wife who was a writer named Valeria for the New York Times. So after issue 4, we got notoriety in New York City. So we got asked to do an Apple talk in between issue 4 and issue 5. So we get asked to do an Apple talk in Apple and at the Apple store in Soho. So it's like the Poppin location. So they started doing this programming with Apple. It was like the first times that they're having people come in and do creative talks. So when you go into the Apple store, we go there for our talk. We get asked to do it. We're like, cool, we're going to do a panel. It's going to be me, Mike, Steve. I think Dave Krugman, who's an amazing photographer from New York, who's been like a beacon of the community from the jump. And he's one of our first team members. And then it was moderated by another one of an amazing photographer from New York named Jerm Cohen, who we asked, because he's just this like amazing, brilliant cartoon-like character from New York City, to moderate it. Because we didn't know what was happening. So we're like, cool, we're going to tell the Street Dream story. So we pull up to the Apple Soho store and there's a talk going on before us, and it's George Lopez, the comedian of, you know, various amounts of fame. So there's a seating area in the back of the store that has a little stage and about seating for about like 70 people comfortably to sit down in the stage. So it was almost fairly packed. It was like about 65 people in there. So as we come in, we were already noticing that behind the stage where the Apple computers are and just like the regular retail shop is happening, there's already people that we know who are lining up for our talk. So we're coming in, we're saying what's up to people. Apple team comes out and takes us to the green room to wait until George Lopez is done doing his thing. We're waiting in the green room, super nervous. You know, I'm trying to stay cool for everybody. Like, yo, it's fine. We're just going to do this. You know, like, let's just talk about what we love. So anyways, we're sitting there getting a drink of water. Steve's pale. And all of a sudden the door opens and Don Cheadle walks in, the actor. And we're just like, yo, that's Don Cheadle. So Don Cheadle comes in, but he says hi to, I think it was George Lopez's family. So there was like, you know, personal people back there. So he says hi to whoever was there. But as he hugs the person that he's saying hi to, he kind of looked at us sideways and looked to us where we're just chilling in the back. And he kind of looked at us almost being like, yo, who are these guys? Not in a negative way, but almost like very curious as to like, who's this? Because they're obviously the next people that are going to talk. Like, who are they? So he says hi to us. We say, what's up? Lo and behold, after that, George Lopez comes in and he does the exact same thing. He looks at us, he looks at Don Cheadle, and he's saying hi to everybody, but he's looking at us bewildered. So we didn't know why it was bewildered. We thought it was just like, oh, yo, like maybe they don't know us, but it didn't seem like it was a negative thing. It was just more like, what's going on here? So lo and behold, we come out, door opens, pans cinematically, 300 people inside the Apple store. And we're just like, yo. Fully filled in the standing room only. They allowed people to chill in the back. The Apple producers are just like, I don't know. We didn't know. So everyone's there and we tell the story. Lo and behold, the person that had gone to the issue 4 event and couldn't make it to the Apple talk asked his wife, Valeria, to go to the talk for him, who happens to be a New York Times writer. So she sits in, sees the story, and about 3 months later hits us up to write an article about us and the project for the New York Times. So that kind of led us into that happening in 2015.
Yeah. And I love what you had shared with me the other day about, you know, when that article came out, what it meant for Steve.
Yeah. I mean, for all of us, and specifically, obviously, Steve being born and raised from New York City, there's a different experience that, you know, a lot of us can't speak to other than being a black man in America. And that's something that, you know, we've always been conscious of in terms of, you know, his role in this and how much obviously all of us have faced. Again, going back to the immigrant story, like Mike C's from a Filipino family, first generation, myself being from Chilenos, and Steve comes from deep roots with his mother in Brownsville, Brooklyn, which is considered the hardest part of the borough. And his father being from the deep South, so North Carolina. So we can only think about like what he's experienced in his life. And, you know, some people aren't supposed to make it in a lot of ways, you know? So when the New York Times article comes out, so issue 5 drops, we do that in Chicago. Shout out to Jason M. Peterson, who was the chief creative officer at an agency called Havas. And Havas was just like this dope agency that has obviously offices all around the world, but they had like this dope space in Chicago, and we did our party there. OG Chase B, who's Travis Scott's DJ, DJ'd the event. Virgil Abloh was supposed to DJ that event, but he was on tour doing some stuff because Jason's connected to all these people. Like Jason's like a legend in like the advertising and just like creative game. So he brought us to Chicago. We had 600 people in Havas rocking the floor, like jumping in unison at the party. So it was another gangbuster show. And then we planned to do issue 6 in Toronto. And we were going to call it 6 in the 6. So there was like this heyday of us finally coming back to Canada and doing something in Toronto. So during the time we had started working with Creator Class, which was an amazing creative collective, powered by Canon. And we had become like one of the first creators who started producing original content for the Creator Class for about 2 years. So that was a big partnership that we created with High Snobiety, Explore Canada, and the Creator Class to do like this multinational show where we brought Taku, who's an amazing Taku Beats from Australia,
amazing,
to Toronto with us because he's an amazing photographer, obviously incredible creative. Music is his thing, songs to make up to, songs to break up to in his fields. So we became like amazing friends with Reggie Taku. So he got to come to Toronto with us that time. So in between 4, we dropped 5. We're doing the interview with the New York Times. It comes out in September 2015, like just after we had dropped issue 6. So the photographer for the New York Times article came to issue 6 event, gangbusters again, multi-tiered event. We had a photo walk. Then we started basically activating, going to these cities and doing multiple events at a time. So we'd have like a photo walk the day prior where everybody would come out. The photo walk for issue 6 was amazing because there was like 200 people on the streets in the pouring rain, like epically. It's actually documented on the Creator Class. If anybody has a chance to check out the Creator Class channel and look at Street Dreams, there's some amazing documentation there. But we had that. We had the party. Selection, which is another amazing creative collective from California who became like akin partnership with us, was in the town, in the city. And we had this amazing party where it just became like a super cool vibe. So the photographer comes to our party, takes a photo of me and Mike and Steve for the article. Obviously, our team has grown since then, so we have amazing people behind the scenes who, help us do what we do. But, us being the founders, we get our portrait taken, and then the article drops. I think it must have been like on a Sunday. It drops online in September, and I'm in New York City with Steve because at that time we had landed, gigs to start just like doing content for different companies, just like on the low, specifically after the Apple talk. So that started kind of building up this notoriety of people sort of seeing us, and Apple being the first brand that actually reached out to us, be like, yo, tell your story. It started showing that there was this like new wave of brand engagement with companies and collectives like ours that had, a cultural sort of epicenter to it. So I'm there doing something with them. I can't remember specifically what, but the article drops online at first, and then it's coming out in the paper like the Monday. So we didn't even know it was going to drop. All of a sudden we get the notification that it's out, and we're in complete awe. And we just had like this amazing moment where Steve and I are heading back to Bed-Stuy, Brooklyn, where he resides. And I remember we got off the train, and he just broke down in the middle of the street because of how monumental the moment was for us to understand that we had taken this idea, and him going through this gambit of emotions of everything that he's experienced as a born and raised New Yorker, and how hard it is and how important it is to make your mark in New York City if you ever have a chance to do that. But that avalanching into him and myself of understanding that like this was built off of 3 people who, like, to begin with, who had their back against the walls. Like we all had this urge and need to find one another so that we can make good on our lives, because we had potentially just painted ourselves into a corner that wasn't necessarily, it was in our control, but it was only because we never had the capacity to find the road to doing what it is that we needed to do for ourselves.
But you made it for yourself.
So we made it. So that moment was really special because, like a flood of emotions came. We had that moment with Steve, and it was just like a really big moment of just how it is that we built our friendship and our brothership at the end of the day. Like, it's gone through ebbs and flows, and, family is family. You understand how hard it is to work with one another at times. But it's never, the good outweighs the bad in the sense of it always culminated in the fact that I think we need to be grateful for the fact that we've changed each other's lives, and we're able to bring a bunch of people along the ride with us. So that's built off of all the support that we have in the background, though, right? That's our families never giving up on us. That's us, pushing when people told you not to push. That's when you needed to make mistakes. That's when you had mental health lapses. That's being in the darkest tunnel ever. but finally seeing light at the end of the tunnel, and not necessarily being at it, but moving towards it. And I think that's what's important to anyone who struggles with things. We're all in a dark tunnel. It just depends on how bright the light is at the end of it. And that's what I think I try to strive to represent through everything that we've experienced with Street Dreams so far.
And I think too, just to add to that, is that belief in yourself that you can get to that light on the other side, you know, like
Very true.
That it's in you too. And it's just so amazing what happened after that.
Yeah.
You guys essentially became a creative studio.
We did.
And we've worked with so many brands, Tribeca Film Festival, Coach, Nike, Honda, AT&T, Iceland Air, so much more.
Yeah.
The question that I have in and around that is, what do you think Street Dreams brought to the table that other agencies weren't doing? And you guys most certainly have like a very distinctive visual voice that's just very, very compelling. It just feels really real and raw.
Yeah. Authenticity. So soon after the New York Times article, that opened up the floodgates of understanding that we got the notoriety for companies to really start looking at us. So Coach was one of the first companies that reached out to us soon after the New York Times article dropped and asked us to come to London and document their first menswear collection in 30 years. And the idea was with what they were doing on their side was redefining the voice of Coach, because at that point it'd become like the mom bag with the C on it, and you can get it at the outlet store. But now it's coming into like ready to wear again, and really sort of like looking for a new audience to engage with. So for some reason, the creative directors and the social media team found us, I guess, through the New York Times article, and we're like, this is the voice and the culture that we want to redefine through the new lens that we're bringing to the table. So right off the jump, the fact that we had a built-in community, that we were super authentic with our storytelling, that the curation was just off the charts, that there was like a high level of art and sort of like style to it that became our own. Street Dreams became a culture. And as we know, you can't build culture. You can't come in and say, I'm building culture today. This is culture. Culture builds itself. So with that reverberation, I think of just like the authenticity that was oozing through our entire spirit, and that going back to that punk rock mentality where it's just like, yo, no, we're going to do this. We really feel like we're the punk rock of photography. And that's coined by Steve. He said it a long time ago, but that really rang true because it's that same spirit of the rebelliousness of saying, no, we're going to do it this way, because if we just fight hard enough, then we know we're going to make some noise, and people can't not pay attention to it once we start sort of getting momentum behind the thunderous presence that it could be potentially built behind the fact that we're just going to do it full tilt and wear our heart on our sleeve through everything that we do. So I think it was authenticity that brought the brands to us, because then it started becoming apparent that it wasn't just photography. It was about our ideas. It was about the fact that we had a voice that we could help mold campaigns with, that we could integrate our agency opportunities into still building for the community. So whether that be working with Honda and doing photo walks in different cities around the US, and having people to come out to shoot the cars on the streets, and then getting a credit in a magazine that's made by us, that's distributed at all the dealerships in North America, that's where we were connecting the commerce and the art into saying, if we're going to get an opportunity, if there's any way, shape, or form for us to pitch a gallery show, a photo walk, a event to meet with people and have them interact with the space, then that will grow your brand association tenfold. So I think we were really on the cusp of understanding the forward-thinking approach of the authenticity of saying, it's got to be real people, it's got to be real stories.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, if you look at the work that's on Street Dreams, it feels like real life. It just feels like life. It's not always, and life isn't always pretty and polished.
It's real. And again, going back to our upbringing, like, it's all about being real. It's about being into hip hop and only listening to hip hop. If you were into punk and you only listen to punk, for me, shout out to the Beastie Boys. I have to say this, they're the crossover for me. When I started listening to the Beastie Boys and heard an interview with them, and they talked about their punk roots, and they dropped their favorite band's name, and they said Bad Brains. And I was like, yo, Bad Brains, Bad Brains changed my life. But yeah, so that idea of just like trying to represent the purest form of everything that we were ever inspired by was what this all culminated as. But at the same time, it was just about building the bridge behind saying, if we can create something that's sustainable, then we can give opportunity to others to then build their resumes through this. Through all of this, what's been amazing is that we've all still maintained autonomy through it all. And Steve, Mike, and myself have built career paths for ourselves that are ingrained within Street Dreams. So in and of itself, I think we were just on the cutting edge of redefining how, and I say agency for lack of a better term, because I really feel like it's a creative collective, and more of like a culture space more than anything else. It started showing that we weren't necessarily getting hired to work for companies. We're working with them. And they really valued what we were doing. They really valued for us to come in and change the whole voice for like Tribeca Film Festival, who we worked with for 5 years. And we basically had 30 events in 11 days where we were hiring like 100 photographers in New York City to go to these places. We did a contest with them in our second year where we flew in 2 photographers who just shared on a hashtag to come shoot the red carpets with us. We were bringing females onto the red carpet. When you're talking about red carpets filled with nothing but men with 6 camera straps on them, and like this old brutish kind of look to what photography sort of represented in a lot of ways. If you were not like, I want to say like in the editorial architecture or like fashion space, then it's a very grunty kind of photography sort of like identity to it. You know what I'm saying? Like, again, not for nothing, and we're just talking about market share, but it's really like the older white man genre of craft, of choice, of leisure, of amateurism. So we walk onto these red carpets with girls, all kinds of stuff, and they're looking at us sideways the first year because we're coming in with one camera, just being super confident in our abilities of just like documenting space and telling the cultural story of anything that's put in front of our lens. And we're first positioned in front of all of them. You should see their jaws drop because we're coming in as these new people on the block.
Redefining. Who are these kids?
That's what I mean. And more so, like, that's year 1. By year 3, they're asking us about our cameras. You know what I mean? So it's this approach of us just, again, saying that we're going to always shake this up and make sure that this doesn't define itself by being anything else except a platform that can be painted on and alchemized in a manner that it's about whoever wants to sort of bring magic to the table with us for, because the base is about authenticity, narratives, storytelling, and just creativity and art that just anchors it all. So that in and of itself just alchemizes itself into a space where, you know, being able to do internal work for Nike and help them redefine running, or work with New Balance and you know, do their main campaign for the New York City Marathon. It's just mind blowing to us because now we're being asked to come behind the scenes and help them create a standard for what other people get hired to do. I think that's super important.
It's incredible. And, you know, just a few more questions because, you know, I am cognizant of your time.
We could talk forever.
I know we could. We totally could.
My apologies.
But, you know, the one thing that I did want to say, listening to you right now and everything that you're saying about, you know, bringing females, you know, onto these carpets too, you know, Street Dreams gives creatives a chance. And, you know, at the end of the day, every human wants to be acknowledged and they want to be seen. And I feel like you've really done that for creatives and photographers across the world. And I think that is just, you know, what a gift.
Super blessed. So give thanks and praises every day for being here and pushing forward.
Yeah. So just a couple more questions.
Yeah, of course.
One of them being, where does Street Dreams go from here? I mean, you have the magazine, you have, you know, your creative collective / studio. You've got this enormous brand clout. You've got the clothing label that's available in
some cool merch. Japan,
in Tokyo. You just finished your successful 3-month residency in Seaport.
Yes,
Seaport, right?
Yeah, Seaport District in New York.
Yeah,
yes,
and you did the show celebrating the wins.
Yep.
There was the pop-up curated a vintage store.
Yep.
You know, where do you guys go from here?
It's cool seeing, again, the natural blessings that have come to us. None of this stuff has ever been forced. And I say that with the most humbleness that I can, because it was really sort of like this blueprint that was set out by us based on intention. And these dominoes started to fall as soon as we started giving ourselves up to something that maybe we never tried before, and finding each other in the right moment in time, and then building a team that was there to support it and understood the vision and was there to wholeheartedly work for nothing. For the first 3 years of all this, like me and Mike, specifically me for a little bit more time than Mike, slept on Steve's floor in Bed-Stuy. Like Steve subletted his room at one point and lived in the living room while we all slept on the floor for the first 3 years of starting Street Dreams. We landed in London to do Coach, and me and Steve got 20 euros in between both of us sharing Subway sandwiches and getting $10,000 worth of gear to be outfitted to go shoot menswear show for Coach. So again, it was like I burned through all my savings to go back to school. Like it was the leap of faith that I think opened up the opportunity to say, I think they've gone through enough and are ready to put in the work to get to the next level. So from starting from the digital space and Instagram, that curtailing itself into a physical publication, that leading us into doing community events to bring people together based on that publication, then that opening up the door for people to hear our story and want to speak about it, and then that grabbing the attention of brands, to that then becoming a space for us to reintegrate that back into our community. I think the future is all about connecting everything into like this fully living ecosystem that for me culminated to specifically what even happened in New York City with the amazing job that the New York team did putting together, celebrating the wins at the Seaport District, which was like the biggest case study for us to get to that point where we can show that we can do a brick and mortar space for 3 months that has a gallery, a retail space, and programming that's curtailed everything from Street Dreams radio parties to conversations about NFTs and like the future of what creativity really matters. Like we're at the cusp of now taking all of that and having the amazing case studies built off of everything that we've done in this space through all of it, and are now finding partners who can come in and help us support exactly that, creating institutional foundations that reside in the spaces of art galleries to cool multidisciplinary incubator ideas. So that's where I think the future is. It's like combining all of that together. And like I mentioned, it's been amazing also still growing a path as a photographer and a creative director through the opportunities built off Street Dreams, because it's still giving me individual opportunities, each one of us, to still progress ourselves in our own identity that's aside from Street Dreams, that maybe becomes almost like Wu-Tang, where Wu-Tang Clan is the crew, but you got Method Man, Raekwon, Inspector Deck, Jizza, and everyone has their own solo album. So that's a beautiful thing now, being able to see that as well, where I just finished up a 3-year partnership with Zeiss, which is insane to me. Like the fact that I shoot how I shoot, and I want to almost like, I'm inspired by minimalism and design and architecture, and to see like a German company come to find me to do this work is again the intention of it. And it just blows my mind every day to understand that people are asking us to tell their stories or asking us to be a part of these journeys with them, and it's only giving back to the greater good of how Street Dreams can build off of anything that I do or that Steve does or that Mike does. It's still going to come back to Street Dreams because the opportunity is sort of like cohesively built into everything that we do.
And it will just keep evolving as the world does.
Exactly. So that's what it is. I think it's just continuing to tell these stories through every facet of creativity and solidifying Street Dreams Vancouver as like a new sort of breeding ground, which we're obviously trying to, we're working in the background about.
Yes.
So little things like that, where I think the pandemic taught me by default, or just almost very coldly, to stop. And I think that it was the biggest gift in a lot of ways to understand my environment and really be grateful for where I'm from, and understanding that the same way that we've connected the dots all around the world, culminated in issue 15, which dropped in Japan in 2019 before the pandemic hit. And we were planning 16 and 17 were going to happen in London, in Africa. That was what was in the plans for 2020. So it's crazy thinking about that. But our trajectory got stunted a little bit in that sense, but it was only because we needed to come back to the source of everything that made us happy, and not understand that maybe sometimes, you kind of fall off the course of what the original mission was. But it's an amazing moment to come back, reset, launch the web space, start working on the next editions of Street Dreams after almost like a 2-year layoff now, and come back with a refreshed approach of like the intention again, and connecting all these amazing opportunities that we have, and being more confident in our abilities, and connecting with wonderful people like yourself in the craft, and just trying to alchemize a new kind of cultural wave even here in Vancouver and Canada in general.
I love it. And I can't wait for that to start really, really happening here, especially in Vancouver.
Very soon.
Yeah, very soon. More to come. My second to last question is, this brotherhood that you have with both Mike and Steve. what do you appreciate about these two guys in your life?
Mike's like my big brother. He's inspired me so much through his lens and how he curated like his experiences. Steve's, the little brother that I never had, and I don't say that in any sense of it being like amateurish. It's just like through our experiences. So we have an amazing range where we're all in the same part of our lives, but almost in just different chapters. So we have like this very big range of experience to I'm going through this shit right now. Oh shit, I went through that as well. So maybe we can help each other along the path. So I think the biggest gift that we've given ourselves, and this extends to everybody who's part of Street Dreams, is that it's really a family. And it's a family of outcasts and misfits that, I don't want to sound cliche, but it's, it took a couple people from Vancouver to like wrangle up these New York characters and contextualize something that we could all now make a global sort of like movement. So I think it's family at the end of the day. And again, we've all gone through tons of things. Life goes on and we all deal with, our separate segments of how life sort of maneuvers for us in the background. And the pandemic obviously just, really, really threw me for a loop in a lot of ways and put a strain on relationships. But it was all just about being honest and being able to find new ways to communicate with one another, because you have to think about like how we got kneecapped by not being able to move around. Like we started to realize like we weren't spending much time in Vancouver. Like we were always thinking about the next place to go to. And then even going to New York and that being like our second home and consistently being with the team. And some things don't transfer over to Zoom. Some things don't transfer over to just talking or, falling off the map because, you're in a place where you can't even let anybody know of what's happening. So in and of itself, I think the family aspect of it is just really what it is. And they've allowed me to look at myself in a different manner and check myself in a way where I need to be a better communicator. Sometimes I'm very sort of like cold and I can drop off and sort of like flip the script because of my very intense perspective on things. But at the end of the day, it's teamwork, and we understand that this is about winning championships and keeping a dynasty strong and evolving with one another and supporting each other through anything that each one of us wants to do. So, we all have our own goals, but at the same time, it's all built off of the foundation that Street Dreams has allowed us to create a life with. So yeah, going forward, it's about just continuously building this in the most natural, honest way possible, continuing to be a voice for our culture and, rubbing, the genie lamp to keep manifesting, more intention, I think is what is important. So it's all about family, and we feel like anybody who supports Street Dreams is our family.
You've got a worldwide fam.
It's exciting. There's definitely a lot of amazing people out there that, like we mentioned earlier, just want to be supported. Yeah. And you giving a platform for these stories to be told and us giving a platform for photography to be shared, and now just art in general is, part of the greater good, I think.
I think so too.
Yeah.
Which, is a perfect segue into my last question with what it is that you do. And I ask this of everyone. What is it that you want to leave behind in the world?
Legacy means everything. And I think that's subjective to a lot of people, obviously. Like you have your own definition of legacy. But for me, it's important to make good on the sacrifices that everyone before me made. And the legacy that I choose to create is to speak through art and give people the platform to understand that it doesn't matter where you come from. And again, not to sound cliche, but it's looking at the underdogs and maybe being part of that underdog story and maybe being an inspiration to somebody who either picked up a camera or feels like they can get their work into a publication because they've seen it on Street Dreams, or reaches out to a brand because they feel like they're inspired enough to do that. It's about continuously creating a foundation for the idea to just grow in and of itself and last way past us on this earth and be able to inspire, all these future generations, because the youth is where it's at. But at the same time, you're never too old to continuously keep learning. And as long as I keep doing that as an individual and try to reflect that through every endeavor that I have, whether it's personal, whether it's private, whether it's out in the open, I'm just trying to be honest through everything that I create. And if that honesty can inspire other people to take a leap of faith through my story and be real with it, then I think that that's where our legacy lies, is being able to just be authentic through every cadence that you have as a human being. And know that you're gonna mess up. This is not saying anybody's perfect. It's just about knowing that you show the scars as much as you show like the wins. And so I think that's where we've offered ourselves at least an opportunity to have a foundation built that we can continuously now develop. So it's
and
more to come, and we're just getting started. Like, this is really just scratching the surface, so I'm very humbled to understand that I have an opportunity now to create a life, not only for myself, but the people around me, that can inspire them to, push forward.
Wow. Well, I think that's a pretty beautiful cadence to live life by.
I agree.
Eric, thank you so much for being here and for sharing your story and always your insights. I very, very much appreciate you as a friend. I'm the type of person that really tries to always live in the possibility of things. And I always feel like after sitting down and idea exchanging with you and just chatting about life in general, my view of possibility grows like 1,000-fold. So thank you for being that for me in my life and for others.
I'm extremely humbled, echoing all your sentiments to the highest degree. Thank you for being such an amazing listener and moderator of life and stories. I think it's amazing seeing you grow into this role. And from the first conversation we had with like the intention that you said about starting something similar to this, or like the genesis of the idea, it's equally as inspiring to see this stuff. And that's what we're all inspired by. I think it's the people around us and understanding that there's a lot still to work on, but as long as we work on it together, then it'll make it a little more comfortable, but also a lot more worth it, So thank you for having this platform, and I'm honored to be a guest and put it on wax.
Yes, put it on wax. This is what makes life worth living. So thank you so much, and so much love for you.
Likewise, thank you.
If you enjoyed that last conversation, be sure to check out more episodes of The Craft on Spotify and guest photo galleries on the website at wearethecraft.com. Thanks again for listening.